Okay. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be and whatever time it might be. This is Chad Marlam, one of the directors of Disaster Relief CERT. It is the 20th of July 2025 and the time is 11 hours 50. What I intend doing on this set of voice notes, a general discussion with regards to missing persons, and it will be handled in groups of 5-minute voice notes, which I will share out on the WhatsApp groups. And as soon as I've completed the series, I will combine all of the voice notes and then eventually publish it to our YouTube channel. Now, being Disaster Relief CERT, the Community Emergency Response Teams volunteer network, many people actually ask me, why is it that we get involved with missing persons? At which point I'm going to categorically state I'm not going to cover that in the first couple of voice notes. I want to firstly take a look at the handling, the process, the procedures, and some of the difficulties experienced by the non-government organizations and other organizations such as the private investigators, etc., when it comes to missing persons and the families. I want to set some let's call it ground rules, specifically saying, this applies to this sector, but the second section or sector that needs to be considered are members of the general public, and also, of course, a third one being family, friends, and the community when it comes to missing persons. I intend to look at the pros and across all aspects. I also am going to refer to several of the conversations and discussions which I have held on the Disaster Relief CERT missing persons discussions groups, as well as I'm not going to specifically refer to the numbers that were produced during the polls that were WhatsApp groups or the WhatsApp discussion group, but I am going to refer to them in a general aspect. So that being said, I think I'm going to end this first voice note and I'll move on with the second voice note, and let's see which way, it goes. And I hope that everybody that is going to listen to this series, specifically on the pros, the cons, and the regarding missing persons, will find it informative. And definitely at the end of the series, the last section that I will cover is the curveball which I have been promising to throw into this conversation, specifically because it is something that a little definitely I use the phrase have not, because I know for a fact they haven't. Had the general communities done so, the questions would have been asked. Okay, let's move on with voice note number 2. Sorry. Okay, let's move on with voice note number 2 for the missing persons discussion, the pros and cons. Just for the record, this is Chad Marlon, one of the directors of Disaster Relief CERT, and my telephone number is 082-859-2684, 20th of July 2025, 11 hours 57. So moving on, the previous voice note was a simple introduction to what I intend doing. I'm not going to go into introduction as to who we are as Disaster Relief CERT. So I want to jump straight in on the conversation and on the topic, which is looking at the pros and cons of missing persons. And the very first thing I think communities need to understand, and group members in particular, social media users in particular, need to understand, is that there are certain that are implemented specifically amongst public and private bodies. And of course, public and private bodies are institutions such as SAPS, Missing Persons Bureau, any organization that provides the recognized flyers for and regarding missing persons, whether they be an association of persons, one of the associations such as an NPO or an NPC, and that also includes our private investigators who assist and get involved in searching for missing persons. This could also extend into other organizations, specifically search and rescue, private security service providers, everybody with the exception of SAPS would in actual fact be considered private bodies, and of course SAPS will fall under the public body concept. Now, one really has to understand that this conversation is not directed to how SAPS or any of the other private bodies in actual fact are expected to and procedures. I mean, no organization can tell another organization ultimately what policies and procedures need to be implemented. However, amongst us, well, naturally, we can in actual fact identify certain areas of concern and share that out not only with these organizations, whether it be public or private bodies, which would, as a public body, SAPS being a public body, need to be considered on that aspect. But there again, if there are policies and procedures on the SAPS side, then it might have to go into actual legislation, and various acts or regulations might need, and national instructions might need to be modified, changed, or otherwise. Now, the one thing that I do want to point out is CPF's community policing forums. Policing forums are established under a constitution. They are in actual fact constituted in terms of the South African Police Services Act, and CPFs generally are considered to be part of the public body fraternity. And I think in the second voice note, I need to very quickly cover the POPI Act with regards, not only is the the POPI Act applicable to this conversation, but so is the SAPS Act, the Child Care, the Children's Act, and the Caregivers Act. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my head around all of the acts, and then the all have implications with regards to missing persons and how information is shared. So generally speaking, any person, doesn't make a difference who it is, who is providing information directly and in person to a public or private body. And as I've said, a public body in this case would be SAPS, and your private body could be a profit organization, or a private investigator, a private investigation company, private security service providers would be considered private bodies. And then in addition to that, of course, CPFs fall under the public body aspect. And wherever a person provides any information to a public or private body, the public, two entities that are obligated by law to protect the personal information of the other third party, or in this case, of the missing persons. No members of the public, no members of social media, no members of WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, X have any legal obligation to protect that information. Once that person is any information in the public domain, i.e. if they specifically go forth and publish information on Facebook, such as their name and their telephone number with regards to a missing person, then that information is considered to be in the public domain and is excluded from the POPI Act in particular. There is one word of caution. I know I'm over the 5-minute mark. There is word of caution. When it comes to the medical history of persons, one needs to consider the overall benefit of disclosing such medical information into a public domain. One would have to weigh up whether or not it is in the best interest of the person, particularly a missing person, a vulnerable person. And just again, a second word of caution is when it comes to children. The Children's Act refers to in the best interest of the child. I think it is something like 58 occurrences throughout the Children's Act in particular. So please bear in mind that when a family member, a parent, a caregiver, or even members of the community put out information, but particular with regards to children, to be in their best interest, and even the medical information. For example, the child might in actual fact suffer from autism or Down syndrome. Those are things that people need to know about in order to know how to deal with and handle a missing person's case with such vulnerabilities and medical conditions. Right, I'm going to move on with voice note 3 in a minute. Moving on with voice note number 3 on the missing persons discussion, the pros and cons. For the record, 20th of July 2025, time is 12 hours 50. This is Chad Marlam, one of the directors of Disaster Relief CERT. CERT being the Community Emergency Response Team's volunteer network. Now, as mentioned in the previous voice note, I basically covered public and private bodies and mentioned a couple of the acts that do apply to missing persons in particular, and especially the POPI Act, the Protection of Personal Information, and what we need to be careful of with regards to sharing of medical information. However, there is one other thing that needs to be taken into account, and that is not. Let me try that again. I won't be able to edit that out, unfortunately. What I want to say is a not-for-profit organization, or an NGO, will also have their own internal policies. And people that engage with NGOs need to comply with their own internal policies. However, that being said, it needs to be made quite clear, not only to the NGOs, but to the members of the public and the family, that your internal policy or procedure as a not-for-profit organization, an NGO in other words, does not apply generally across the spectrum of our communities. So let me try and elaborate on what I'm saying. I'll use Disaster Relief CERT as an example. Disaster Relief CERT, the board of directors will in actual fact implement certain policies and procedures which are applicable to the Disaster Relief CERT registered volunteer network and volunteers only. Where we may, for example, stipulate that, look, in order for us to share information of a missing person, we need A, B, C, and D. That policy does not, in actual fact, apply to any other non-profit company, non-profit organization, public benefit organization, or any other PDY Limited, or to SAPS, or to the Missing Persons Bureau. It only applies to what we do internally as Disaster Relief CERT. Yes, we can ask the person, the individual, the family member, the friend, or the community member who is approaching us for assistance, we can expect them and even demand from them certain information before we can proceed. But my internal policy definitely does not have any impact or any effect or force on any other member of the community within the country of South Africa, which is the area that we operate in. And that must be clearly stressed and understood by all. The second thing that needs to be understood is between each of the NGOs, each NGO will have their own unique, distinctive policy or procedure which needs to be followed. And they also cannot force any other NGO to apply the same rule or effect. Let me give you a good practical example. It is this example that necessitated the need to open up a discussion on the missing persons discussion group, because there is certain things that you will see as I continue with this training and we further proceed with the voice notes, that this is an area of concern. All, and I'm using the word all because I believe it is all. I have yet to find an NGO who does not require the following in order to assist when it comes to missing persons. And that is an OB number or CAS number. Now just think carefully about that. Go back on all of the flyers. And I say that with some hesitation. Check your flyers. Because in the next voice note, I want to cover the next aspect as a follow-up to the OB and or CAS number as being part of an internal NGO policy or procedure. So let's move on with voice note. This will now be voice note number 4 that's coming up. Right, moving on with voice note number 4 on the pros and cons regarding missing persons discussion. 20 July 2025, 13:05. This is Chad Milam, one of the directors of Disaster Relief CERT. For the record, and my number is 082-859-2684. Almost forgot my number. In the previous voice note, I brought up the issue of internal policies and procedures and the requirement by the NGOs to have a OB number or CAS number. Now, that is all fair and well with regards to the NGOs. And of course, it is a requirement. And here is the reason. Being non-government organizations, either on the public benefit organization, non-profit company, or non-profit organization, or even as a PDY Limited, being private bodies, they have to be able to protect the data and information which they receive directly from a family member, a parent, or even a member of the community. They have a legal obligation to do that. And one of the best ways of being able to track and keep a record of what transpires with that particular case is to work through the OB or CAS number. The advantages of the OB and the CAS number is regardless of which police station that an inquiry might be made at, by being able to provide the station name and the OB number, it's a quick reference to a particular case. And that is something that the NGOs would in actual fact need in order to confirm any details or change to the status of the person that has been reported as missing with the IO or the investigating officer. So everybody, and I mean everybody, needs to understand that whenever you make contact with an NGO and they ask you for the OB number, you definitely need to be able to give the OB number or the CAS number. On the point of the OB number, it must be noted that before a person leaves the police station, after they have reported a person missing and completed the Form 55A, they must insist on the OB number so that they can arrange or make an arrangement to have the flyer, a recognized flyer, produced and put out in distribution. And in the next voice note, I want to cover that whole issue of the recognized flyer and why it is important to utilize the recognized flyers. However, that being said, it must also be noted that we have got a multitude of WhatsApp groups where the group administrators insist on having an OB number before they will, in actual fact, distribute any missing persons information. You see, this is where the concept of an internal policy is being expected to be carried out in the public domain, or in a domain where that particular public policy, directive, or procedure does not apply. So now, because of the fact an NGO insists on having an OB number, in order to proceed with creating a distributed flyer, now all of a sudden group admins are under the impression that before they can distribute any information regarding missing persons, an OB number is required. Well, sorry to say, and group admins, it is really not in the best interest of any person who has been reported as missing to prevent the distribution of missing persons information, whether it be by a family member, another organization, an individual, or through a recognized flyer, where you insist on putting out or having an OB number put out for that particular post. It is not in the best interest of those people. And in the next voice note, I'm going to continue with the OB, and we will take it from there. So moving on now to voice note number 5. Okay, moving on with voice note number 5, 13/10/27/2025. This is Chad Milam, one of the directors of Disaster Relief CERT, CERT being the Community Emergency Response Team's volunteer network, and my number is 082-859-2684. Okay, so we are busy discussing the issue regarding missing persons and the OB number. Now, as I've said, there are internal policies and procedures, and the NGOs in particular insist on having either an OB number or a CAS number in order for them to produce and distribute recognized flyers, and I've explained the reason why. I also brought up the issue of group admins, social media group admins, in particular WhatsApp, who insist that an OB number be distributed with missing persons information. And I've stated that that is definitely not in the best interest of a missing person. And I'd like to add, especially if it is regarding a child. But here's one of the curveballs that I want everybody to take particular note of. And to do this and to be able to take note of what I'm about to say, you need to go and have a look at all of the different types of flyers, recognized flyers that are put out in distribution. And you will notice that some of the recognized flyers in distribution do not contain OB or CAS numbers. They will probably, in some cases, provide the station, precinct, SAPS precinct, where the case was opened, and they may include the investigating officer. Not always. Several of the flyers will only have contact numbers for the key personnel within that particular NGO. And that NGO will liaise and make contact directly with the investigating officer, utilizing the information that they have on record. Now, why do I bring this up and make a point of this? Okay, quite simply put. You got a group admin now that receives a flyer from NGO number 1. I'm not going to mention names because it must not come out that I'm saying if this happens, that person is wrong. If that happens, that NGO is wrong, whatever the case might be. That's not the message I want to bring across. They got internal policies and procedures. So NGO number 1 puts out a flyer with an OB number, the police station contact telephone number, as well as the investigating officer's name and telephone number. And they distribute their flyer. But NGO number 2 does not put any of that information. And NGO number 3 will supply the precinct, but not the IO and not the OB number. And these now appear on WhatsApp groups. And we've got these WhatsApp administrators in their wisdom deleting posts from NGO 2 because there's no OB, and NGO 3 because there's no OB, because they think that an OB number is required. No, an OB number is not required. Not by the members of the public, not by anybody that's driving down the street. They don't need that information. They need one point of contact. If they see the missing person or they know the whereabouts of that missing person, they only need to contact one person, whoever's name is on the flyer. Leave it up to that NGO to deal with the matter from that point. Who gives a WhatsApp administrator the right to delete those messages? I'm inclined to say that that is in contravention of various legislative processes that is not in the best interest, in particular when it comes to a child. So just in closing on the occurrence book number at this stage, I'd like to add the reason why some of the NGOs do not publish the OB number is because of the fact that there are nefarious people out there who utilize the OB numbers, the IO's information, the police station's information for nefarious means, especially when it comes to extortion. And they will contact the family members, especially if the family member has already put their personal information, name, telephone number out in circulation. And they could be claiming that they are from SAPS and here's the OB number, and they get you to open up and, yes, no, come and meet us here, and we've got him here, or we've got her here, whatever the case might be, and then they robbed, or we demand money, etc., etc., etc. So whoever it is that is out there demanding that OB numbers are in actual fact are a requirement for the distribution of missing persons information, please, ladies and gentlemen, stop with it. It's not in the best interest. And I'd like to say to the NGOs as well, yes, you can insist on having an OB or CAS number specifically for you to obtain information. But really, I have to make an appeal to every single private and public body and say, stop expecting the members of the public to have an OB number before they in actual fact share that information. If an NGO is going to distribute the information with an OB, but not display the OB, that is up to that NGO. So to the NGOs that do demand OB numbers or do post OB numbers on their flyers, don't demand other NGOs to do the same. Your policy doesn't apply to them and their policies don't apply to you. Always look at what is in the best interest of the missing person. Yes, protect yourselves as an NGO. By all means, definitely protect yourself as an NGO and make sure you've got the relevant information in order to make your job easier. But from the time you produce the flyer, that goes out into the public domain and you can choose whether or not to utilize an OB. All right, we're going to move on now with number 7. Thanks all. Let's move on with voice note number 6. 27-2025, 1321. This is Chad Milam, one of the directors of Disaster Relief CERT. CERT being the Community Emergency Response Team's volunteer network. And my number is 082-859-2684. Now, at the end of voice note number 5, I said we will move on with number 7. I misnumbered my voice note thought process there. Okay, moving on. Regarding OB numbers, we're busy discussing the pros and cons of missing persons as part of a discussion. With regards to the OB numbers, just to summarize, NGOs do require OB numbers in order to collect the information from the third parties directly, and of course it does make sense for them to have OB numbers. And then I brought up the issue of the administrators that demand having OB numbers before they will share missing persons information. However, one of the additional curveballs is that some of the NGOs, when they distribute their flyers, they do not provide the OB number on their particular flyer. They may not even provide the police station or the investigating officer's information, and only provide only their own contact details. I maintain that no administrator on any WhatsApp group or social media platform has the legal right to prevent or delete or remove any information regarding missing persons, and missing persons who are children in particular. So on that basis, it must be understood that admins, whether or not there is an OB number, you need to let that information go through. You need to consider the following things. In the event a missing persons flyer does go out and it doesn't have an OB, and you in actual fact delete it off of your group, it could always come to a point in time whereby a member in your group may very well have recognized that person, and following media releases, if the photograph comes up in a newspaper article and that person was found deceased, and one of your group members now says, sheesh, I saw that person, why wasn't the flyer distributed? And then somebody else says it was, and it was deleted off of the group. Well, you know what, group administrators, you may very well have contributed to the loss of life. That's the bottom line. I'm not going to beat about the bush. Through your deletion of that message, group members or members in your group may very well have been able to have notified the contact person as stated on the flyer of that missing person's location. And through you deleting it, that missing person could very well have lost their life for whatever reason it may very well be. So again, my appeal to administrators, do not stop the distribution of information regardless of where missing persons information comes from. And again, I'd like to reiterate that the NGOs, please, whatever you do, don't insist that all NGOs distribute their flyers with OB numbers, and definitely please bring an end to requiring WhatsApp groups to have OB numbers, etc., put out there. Now, as I said, that there are some nefarious people out there that will try and extort money, or even find out additional information from persons once they have an OB number or an investigating officer's name. Even with an IO's name, you can always phone a police station, you can ask for the IO, you can spin them a cock and bull story and get the OB number and all the rest of it. The IO might give that information out if he feels everything is above board. And meantime, back at the ranch, it's a point of gathering some of the information regarding a person themselves. So please, I need to bring the discussion of the OB number to an end, and let us get the information out there as a matter of urgency. So moving on then, what will we be going to? This is voice note number 6. And of course, now the next voice note will be number 7. Voice note number 7 on the missing persons discussion, pros and cons. 20th of July 2025, 13 hours 30. This is voice note number 7, and it's Chad Milam, one of the directors of Disaster Relief CERT, CERT being the Community Emergency Response Team's volunteer network. Moving on with the overall discussion, in the previous 6 voice notes, or at least five of them, we've been discussing the need for an OB. And one of the bones of contention that I have, and this is in a personal capacity, is that when we in actual fact do require an occurrence book number before a flyer is created and distributed, I'd like to refer, for those of you that will watch this ultimately on YouTube. However, when the voice note is posted, I'm also going to post the simplified missing persons timeline, because in my opinion, and having dealt with the families and friends of a few hundred missing persons over the last couple of years in particular, what has become quite clear and evident is the amount of time it takes from when the person was last seen to the time that he is or she is identified as being missing, and from the time that a person has been considered missing to the time that an actual flyer has been distributed. It is several hours. So far, I have not seen anything below 6 hours from the time that a family member realizes their loved one is missing to the time that a flyer has been distributed. And that could even be extended into almost 24 hours in some instances. But you can add up to 12 hours, especially when a person does go down to a police station, let's say at 1800, and then the policeman expect them to come in there with a printed photograph or printout of a photograph of the missing person. And of course, by then everybody is closed. That family member can't go and get a printout, might not know friends or family members with printers, and they've got to wait until 8, 9 o'clock the next morning before they can get it printed, before they can then, in actual fact, report the person missing with SAPS and ultimately get an OB number before they can make contact with one of the NGOs. Then let's be reasonable. You can't expect to give the information to an NGO and get a flyer out 5 minutes later. You've got to allow that NGO to go through a process of producing a flyer. Even part of their process might be to make contact and confirm the OB number, or speak to the IO, confirm the IO details, whatever the case might be, depending on what their policy and procedures say. So by the time that you get to the point of having an occurrence book number made available, it can be many, many hours. Now, here's my argument. You'll see I've put it on the simplified missing persons timeline. In a period of 7 or even 9 hours, a child that is abducted, say in Johannesburg, could already be loaded on a ship in Durban docks and headed out as part of a human trafficking ring. And that's the point that I think everybody's got to realize and understand. That the longer that we wait in getting a missing person's information out in the public domain, the greater the chances that we do not have a positive outcome, i.e. that child is not found, that person is not found, especially if it is a person with vulnerabilities like autism, for example, or other medical conditions. Diabetes is another one, or even if they are suicidal. Just think about this. The longer that everybody waits in getting that information out there, the greater the chances that we lose a life. And again, I'm going to ask everybody, is this in the best interest of a missing person, and in particular a vulnerable person, where there is a requirement for the OB? Again, I'm going to make it quite clear. There is no ways I'm saying don't open a case with SAPS. You definitely have to open a case with SAPS. But you also need to be able to get the information out there and raise the alarm as quickly as possible. Okay, so moving on to voice note number 8, we're gonna look at raising that alarm and a couple of the pros and cons with regards to raising of an alarm. Moving on to voice note number 8 on the 20th of July 2025, 13 hours 38. So this is Chad Milam, one of the directors of Disaster Relief CERT. CERT being the Community Emergency Response Teams volunteer network. We continue our discussion on missing persons and from this point onwards, we're going to discuss raising. Now, I've for the benefit of the video, I'll add the simplified timeline portion that's relevant to the discussion to the YouTube video. But for the WhatsApp users, I'll provide the PDF in order for you to have a look at it. I'm not going to go through the PDF line by line or item by item, but I just want to get to a particular point in time and discuss it from there. So let's say, for example, you've got a child that was last seen at 1500 on a Friday. The parents only arrive home at 1800. That means that there's already 3 hours that the child is missing, at which point we have no OB or CAS number. Then between the hours of 1800, sorry, I see I've picked up an error there. It's not 18,000 hours. It's 1800 to 1900. The family, member could be doing an initial search of the neighborhood, the house, the friends, etc. That means the child is now missing for 4 hours, still no OB or CAS number. Then from 1900 to 1930, the family member decides, well, now I better find out what should I do in a case like this that could take up to an hour and a half to get all the relevant information together, having discovered that, now you need to go and open up a case and I need a photograph and all the rest of it. That could there take them an hour and a half. These are estimate figures, at which point, or at least half an hour, at which point this child now could be missing for 4.5 hours, still no OB or CAS number. From that point, they then arrange transport. Not everybody has immediate access to transport. They might have to wait for husbands and wives to come home, or fathers and mothers to come and fetch them, brothers and sisters, get a lift, organize an Uber or whatever, and go down to SAPS. They only arrive at 8:30. That's 5.5 hours. The child is missing, still no OB or CAS number. And then by the time that they get helped at the desk or get to the desk for help, they could be 9 o'clock. I'm being conservative in a 30-minute wait to get to the desk. 6 hours missing, still no OB or CAS number. Then over the next hour and a half, the paperwork is completed and filled in and everything else. That's 7.5 hours that the child has now been missing, and it is at this point that an OB number becomes available. Now, think about that. 3 o'clock until 10:30, no OB numbers. So the best thing to do is raise the alarm as soon as you begin the initial search. That's at 1800. That's already 4 hours into the person being missing, but still, it is definitely better than 8 hours or 7.5 hours. Raise the alarm. But how does one do that? In most cases, what will happen is the family will put a message out on Facebook. My son is missing. Please contact me. My name is whatever, and here's my telephone number, and they put that out. Well, that's exactly what raising the alarm is. And the sooner that alarm is raised, the better, the greater the chance of finding the child or the person with vulnerabilities or any other missing person. However, there are some dangers that need to be considered. So this is where the pros come in and the cons come in. So by raising the alarm as quickly as possible, the pro to it is the missing person may be found sooner rather than later. And they may be found alive, not harmed, not injured, or even deceased. So that is one of the pros. But the con, we're going to talk about in more detail in voice note number 9. Let's move on with that. Moving on with voice note number 9 on the 20th of July 2025. Time is 13 hours 4 Vilam, one of the directors of Disaster Relief, CERT being the Community Emergency Response Teams volunteer network. For the record, my number is 082-859-2684, and we continue the discussion on missing persons, in particular the pros and the cons thereof. Now, in the previous voice note, one of the cons that I mentioned of raising an alarm early was that there is a danger with regards to putting out a message on Facebook. that states my son is missing, or maybe a photograph is attached. In most cases, there is one. My name is so-and-so, and here's my telephone number. Well, this is where it gets a bit tricky. What usually happens is that goes viral. It gets picked up on WhatsApp and it gets put out on WhatsApp. Now, a lot of messages do still go through WhatsApp, even though there are group admins that will delete messages or not allow messages like that to be shared on their groups because there is no OB number or CAS number. Now, I have already requested that rather that the messages do go out, but I am definitely going to point out that whenever you put out a message with your own name and your own telephone number, you are in actual fact placing yourself at risk of having somebody on Facebook or on WhatsApp pick up on the message and then phone you. And they will probably demand money. They inevitably do. They try and extort money out of you. And they will tell you outright that they are busy beating your son up, they're busy raping your son or your daughter, or they're going to kill them unless you put money into their account. And I'm going to ask you as a parent, as a friend, and as a family member, if you found yourself in a position where your loved one or your friend was missing, emotionally, are you going to be able to cope with and handle receiving a telephone call extorting money out of you and being told what is going to happen to your friend, your family member, your child? And that is a question I think every single parent, every single member of society needs to consider, which means that you need to find a different way and a different manner within which to raise the alarm. This is usually where it is stated, report the case, get onto one of the NGOs, get a recognized flyer out there. Yet the downfall of that, as we've already discussed, it can take several hours. So there has to be middle ground somewhere. And this is perhaps where you need to reach out to a friend or another family member who would be able to cope and assist in cases like this and be able to field and shield the calls and screen the calls that may be received. In other words, as a mother, instead of putting your telephone number out there, or as a father, instead of putting your telephone number out there, you might have a friend who doesn't tolerate bull and who will be able to emotionally and psychologically handle such threats and ignore them, ultimately ignore them, because it is that at that point whereby you, in the process of raising the alarm, you should be then preparing and getting yourself down to SAPS to open up the case, so that when the case is opened, those telephone numbers that have called demanding money, etc., can also be handed over to the investigating officer. So I'd like everybody just to stop and reflect on what I've said now. We need to strike a balance between raising the alarm and waiting for 8-9 hours before we can in actual fact do something. So you can raise the alarm within minutes of realizing somebody is missing. They could be missing for half an hour. I mean, if you think about it, a child can go missing in a shopping center. Is that a kidnapping, or is that a child that is lost? Well, it could be a combination of two. So one has to be able to strike a balance in a situation like that. And then one will have to determine whether it is a kidnapping or if the child is just naturally lost. And somebody else is, very difficult on that, because somebody could pick the child up to take them to an info center in order to do a broadcast looking for the parents for the child. and then that person could in actual fact be considered to be kidnapping the child. So do you see where I'm going? Where we need to in actual fact be careful in terms of what we're doing, but not be over cautious and not do anything on the other end. We have to have a balance. So just stop and reflect on that. How do we get the message out to the members of the public, to the community members, to mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters, aunties, uncles, aunts, and the general community, to say, look, instead of putting your telephone number out where you're not going to be able to cope with receiving threats and demands, etc., but rather give somebody else's telephone number, that can go into circulation. At least when that goes into circulation, it might hit 10,000 people, but when the flyer comes out several hours later, that flyer can go out to 100,000 people. All right, so we're going to move on now with voice note number 10 in due course. Voice note number 10 on the pros and cons of the missing persons discussion. It's the 20th of July, 2025. Time is 14 hours 11. And this is Chad Marlam, one of the directors of Disaster Relief CERT. CERT being the Community Emergency Response Team's volunteer network. And my number for the record is 082-859-2684. So as we continue the discussion on the pros and cons of missing persons, we've looked at public and private bodies and who and what they are. We've had a look at where the policies and procedures fit in. We've had a look at the requirement for OB and or CAS numbers before sharing the information. I've also had a look at why it is important sorry, that group admins don't insist on having an OB number. And of course, that has brought us to the point then of what do we do when we have a look at a simplified timeline where it can take up to 8 hours, 8.5 hours before we even get an OB number, and as to whether or not that is in the best interest of a missing person, in particular when it comes to vulnerable persons or persons with vulnerabilities, especially children. And the only conclusion that I can come to is that, one, we need to raise the alarm as early as possible. And then, of course, I've moved it over and said, okay, but even when we do raise the alarm as early as possible, we've got a con, and that is a danger, high risk of having, nefarious people try and extort money and threaten friends, family, and parents in particular, of what will happen to their loved ones if money isn't paid over. So ultimately, at the end of the day, as I mentioned in the previous voice note, there is no two ways about it. A case number has to be opened, regardless of the fact. We have to open up missing persons cases. We have to raise the alarm as early as possible. And we need to ensure that we don't put our own personal details there before we can get a recognized flyer out. And my recommendation is that we rather, as friends, as family, as community, as parents, we rather have somebody else who would be in a better position to psychologically and emotionally be able to handle any extortion or threats that may be posed or presented or given to us. So to bring this to closure, I mean, it's quite clear that there are three very distinct areas that have to be carried out. From the time that a person it's been established that a person is or may be missing, that search has to begin immediately. An immediate search has to begin. And at the same time, we need to raise the alarm. And at the same time, we have to report the matter to SAPS. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, what I am saying to communities, what I am saying to friends and family, is that when you are of the opinion that a person is missing, has gone missing, or may very well be missing, in other words, they are unaccounted for. They are not in a place where you expect them to be at that moment in time. You need to gather your own local team, and you need to bring in friends and family members that are going to be able to raise the alarm and use their telephone numbers while you are phoning aunties, uncles, and friends. And you need somebody that is, well, preferably somebody that's going to phone friends, family, and aunties and uncles. But you also need somebody that's going to go down to SAPS or take you as a parent down to SAPS, so they can drive and you can be phoning. And while you're at the police station and you're waiting to get to the counter, you can still be phoning. Whereas the family member that stays at home, always remember to keep somebody at home or wherever that person is supposed to be, just in case that person returns to the location. You know, especially when it comes to children. They don't think along the lines of, I'll have my parents worried if I go and visit a friend and come home 3 hours later. Well, they might return home and you'll find yourself at the police station reporting they're missing, and then they're the ones that are concerned as to where you are, and you are not in the place where you were expected. So this whole concept of raising the alarm early when it comes to missing persons really has to be dealt with in multiple parallel streams. Whichever way we look at it, you need to get your family involved. You need to be able to get down to SAPS to open a case. You need to be able to raise that alarm as quickly as possible without delay. You might even need to have a family member take a photograph down to one of the local print shops or to a friend or family member to go and print a photograph and then come down and meet you at the police station. You know, don't try and go and do the photograph of your own accord and then go to the police station, because that is going to just add to that simplified timeline of missing persons. Okay, we'll go on now with voice note number 11 in a sec. Moving on with voice note number 11 on the 20th of July 2025, 14 hours 23. This is Chad Milam, one of the directors of Disaster Relief CERT. CERT being the Community Emergency Response Teams Volunteer Network. And for the record, my number is 082-859-2684. In the previous voice note, what I was looking at was addressing how we in actual fact handle a missing persons case and ensuring that we do everything on multiple parallels at the same time. And have certain members staying at home, others being able to receive telephone calls that are not directly part of the family, that are psychologically and emotionally capable of handling any potential threats or extortion calls, those that might be able to go and get photographs printed, others that can drive you down as a parent or family member down to the local SAPS precinct stationed while you phone around and, you know, try and establish location, etc. of people. And throughout these previous voice notes, you will have heard I've referred to recognized flyers on a recognized basis. Now, it must be made clear that there is no such a thing as an official flyer. Nobody issues an official flyer. No one party is capable of issuing an official flyer. Official flyers ultimately mean flyers issued by a non-government organization. It is their own official flyer, but for the purposes of the general public, they must be known as recognized flyers. And of course, there has to be appropriate updates and status changes on an official level. So officially speaking, an NGO may issue a recognized flyer with regards to a missing person. That being said, only that organization is legally entitled to change, modify, add anything extra to the actual flyer. It is actually considered fraud to deface a NGO's official flyer, recognized flyer. Nobody may do so. regardless of the fact that a person may be found either alive, found safe, found harmed, found deceased. Nobody can take another person or organization's flyer and go and stick the words over it, found, and then put it into distribution. So the NGOs may issue an official update, which they will do by distributing an updated status to their own recognized flyers. This becomes a little bit more complicated when personal flyers are put out in distribution. In other words, somebody's family member goes missing, and one of the family members takes a photograph and jumps onto Canva and produces that particular infographic with a photograph and last seen and a couple of details and a name and contact telephone number, who are not members of the parents or whatever. And then they put that out on Facebook, or they put that out on WhatsApp. So the question then is, would those be considered recognized flyers? Technically, yes, they are. So we need to be careful that we use the right terminology, I think, and I don't think the terminology here is something that has been put into play. Recognized flyers should be flyers that are distributed by registered NPOs, NPCs, PBOs, CPFs, SAPs. SAPs also issue missing persons information on flyers from time to time. But then I think when flyers are distributed from family members' perspective, we should look at those as personal flyers. And personal flyers should also be put out into distribution. Look at it as up to a family member. Let me put it to you this way. And I'm speaking to all the members of the community, friends, family, NGOs, private investigators, SAPs, Metro. Did I say private security? I'm speaking to all of you. Myself as an individual, not one of you has the legal right to tell me in my personal capacity what information I can post on Facebook, and not one of you has the legal right to tell me what information I can post on WhatsApp. When it comes to me or my family, nobody can tell me what I can and cannot put out there. And that must be clearly understood. Seriously, that has to be clearly understood. There is not a single law. That is called freedom of expression. And if you try and stop any person from distributing that information, you are violating their constitutional right to freedom of expression. And in this case, it is out of necessity. Maybe they might not have done it ordinarily, but out of necessity, they could have. So please be very careful when it comes to sharing of recognized flyers, personal flyers, and preventing personal flyers have been put out into distribution, because you are violating that friend, that family, and that community's member right to distribution or of expression or to conducting business, whatever the case might be. So please be careful when we look at that one. Okay, we're going to move on with voice note number 12.